I'd like to begin, of course, by acknowledging that the land we are meeting on is land of which the Ngunnawal people are the traditional custodians. I extend my respect to their elders past and present and to all Indigenous people here this evening. I'd like to acknowledge and welcome the presence of the Deputy Chancellor and Chancellor-elect from next year, Dr. Tom Calma, AO, our guest speaker, Dr. Chris Sarra, the Executive Chair of the Stronger, Smarter Institute, distinguished guests, colleagues, students and graduates of the university. The Ngunnawal Lecture Series began as an initiative of the Ngunnawal Centre at the university to give voice to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander views on the many topics that shape their communities and Australia as a whole. The Ngunnawal Lectures continue to do this by hosting prominent Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people to deliver lectures on issues of significance. And we think that lectures such as these are important ways in which the university can communicate and share knowledge with the wider community, and so in the process have an effect on the quality of our graduates and future government policies. In our new strategic plan, we commit ourselves to contribute through our education and research to the building of just, prosperous, healthy and sustainable communities which are committed to redressing disadvantage and reconciliation with Australia's Indigenous peoples. And we're doing quite a lot at the moment in pursuit of that commitment. We have grown the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students studying with us by 20% in the last 18 months, and we have a vision to double our enrolments over the next 5 years. We have recently won 3 grants under the Higher Education Participation and Partnerships Programme, led by Dr. Michelle Fleming, totalling $2.4 million, all of which are associated with supporting and encouraging Indigenous students to come through to tertiary education. We have a partnership now with the Aurora Project and also with the Stronger, Smarter Institute, and Tom Calma will mention these in a moment. And throughout this process, we're taking into account Larissa Berent's review of higher education access and outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and so we're spreading the responsibility for providing student support, employment opportunities, and teaching in Indigenous cultures and knowledge to faculties and central support areas across the whole university. And although enterprise bargaining negotiations are continuing, we have reached an agreement with the unions to double the number of staff from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander backgrounds in the next 3 years. This will be achieved within the university's Indigenous employment strategy, supported by our recently revised Reconciliation Action Plan. The agreement includes the establishment of Indigenous teaching fellowships, joint support of Indigenous recruitment, plus other initiatives such as Indigenous leave and recognition of Indigenous knowledge. I'll be speaking to you later after Chris Sarra has delivered his lecture, but it's now my pleasure to welcome the Deputy Chancellor, Dr. Tom Calma, AO, to say a few words and formally introduce our speaker. Tom.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, and welcome all to today. And it's great to see so many people here. Can I also acknowledge that we're on the land of the Ngunnawal peoples and recognise all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here and all friends who've come to join us today. The University of Canberra has a number of local and national partnerships designed to break down the barriers to higher education for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The university works across the region with the ACT region, with the ACT Education and Training Department to support the Indigenous Aspirations Initiative for students in years 5 to 12. We work with the Smith family to support Indigenous students through the Smith family's Learning for Life program. And we also work with numerous schools across the region to support Indigenous students. We have key partnerships with the Aurora Project and more recently with Dr. Sarra's organisation, the Stronger, Smarter Institute. And as Professor Parker mentioned, we've recently been awarded $2.4 million to support 3 key initiatives. The first being the ACT Indigenous Success Project, which is a project that's being led by the University of Canberra and has been undertaken in partnership with the ANU. Both universities will work with a number of secondary schools to break down barriers to higher education for students from Indigenous and low socioeconomic backgrounds across the ACT and the southern New South Wales region. And we also have a specialised university pathway program for Indigenous students that will be piloted in school hubs across the region. The Aspirations Initiative, the TAI we call it, Academic Enrichment Program, is a collaboration that we do with the Aurora Project and also with the Charlie Perkins Trust and the University of Canberra. Aurora also works on TIA with the Roberta Sykes Indigenous Education Foundation. And TIA aims to increase opportunities and support for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander high school students, helping them to realise their potential to succeed at school, university and beyond. And the latest funding that we've received of the $2.4 million will support the enhancement and extension of the TAI program. And we're very proud to say that the university has recently partnered with the Stronger Smarter Institute to break down barriers to higher education for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students while working with schools in the ACT and southern New South Wales to build the leadership capacity of school principals and teachers to deliver quality education outcomes for Indigenous and low socioeconomic students. The university is very excited to work with Dr. Sarra to further support this outstanding work and the work of his institute, and particularly because it has a very proven record over quite a number of years. And I'm sure we'll be very happy to hear what Dr. Sarra has to say. So now that his notes have arrived, thank you Toby, I now have the great pleasure in introducing Dr. Chris Sarra, Indigenous Education Specialist. Chris has had an extensive career in education, with his passion being the pursuit of positive and productive education outcomes for Indigenous children. Originally from Bundaberg in Queensland, Chris has completed a Diploma of Teaching, a Bachelor of Education and a Master of Education. In recent years, Chris completed a PhD in Psychology at Murdoch University. In the late 1990s, Chris became the principal of Cherbourg State School in southeastern Queensland. Through strong leadership and clear vision, he facilitated many changes at the school which saw increased enthusiasm for student learning, particularly by Indigenous students, through dramatically improving school attendance and increasing community involvement in education. Three very key and important areas. The school became nationally acclaimed for its pursuit of the strong and smart philosophy, espousing a strong and positive sense of what it means to be Aboriginal in today's Australian society, and that Indigenous students can achieve outcomes comparable to other students. Chris has been the recipient of many awards and much recognition as his ideas, enthusiasm and vision have taken hold nationally and internationally. And I'm proud to say that we go back a fair way in both of what we do in education in our respective fields, and very much in looking at not only education per se, but in the determinants that impact on good learning. And those determinants are particularly important, and particularly as you'll hear Chris talk about the engagement of family and community in the education system, which is going to be so important for us to look at. But we should never forget that, for a good education outcome, we need to have a good health outcome. And we've got to address issues like hearing and eye problems within our communities, complemented and led by the work of Chris Sarra. So could I please invite Chris up to the stage, and please extend a warm welcome to Chris.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to confess I was a little bit nervous in the lead up to tonight's lecture, and nervous I think because of the kind of changing political sort of landscape that exists at the moment. But I guess I shouldn't be. I'm in good company, and we have a proven formula. I apologise for my offsider there, Toby, running backwards and forwards. I had some dramas with getting some things printed. And it's not unlike this book in which I will share some parts with you. This was released late last year. Oh, thank you. And I've said to some people, it was towards the back end of it. It was almost as if I was typing the last pages while they were printing the first pages. And so as I deliver my speech, you'll see me reading the first pages, and Toby will deliver the last at some stage. But we're going to get there. It'll be fine. It's going to be fine. I really am grateful to see such a turnout tonight, and really thankful for your interest. Can I just start with an acknowledgement of country? And let me start this address by acknowledging distinguished guests and also the traditional custodians upon the land we meet, the Ngunnawal people. Can I invite you to do this with me, just to reflect quietly on the people of this land some 300 years ago, let's say, and feel free to close your eyes if you like, and I would ask you just to wonder about the people of that time and the children of that time and the challenges that they might have faced. Think about the landscape that existed here. Let's wonder about that, and let's wonder about the children of that time and the challenges that they might have been confronted by on this place, on the land that we share before these buildings were here. Let me invite you to imagine just 150 years ago this landscape and the challenges and the children of that place and the issues that they might have confronted as they encountered a new society, a white society from the other side of the world, and what sorts of challenges might have existed then. Let's think about for a moment the people of 50 years ago and the children of that time and the challenges that they might have faced on this land. The Aboriginal children, and by this stage the non-Aboriginal children, and wonder about what it was like for them. Let's think about the descendants of those people who walk among us here today and those who walk with them here today. Think of their children, both black and white, and the challenges they might confront together. And now let's imagine this same landscape 50 years into the future on this land, and let's reflect on how we want them to be together. Let's wonder about how we'd like them to embrace each other's humanity in order to overcome the challenges that they face together. Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here tonight to deliver this lecture, and further I'm so delighted that the Stronger Smarter Institute is commencing a very important partnership together in which we will work with a range of schools in partnership with the University of Canberra throughout New South Wales and the ACT to work with and inject, where required, high quality, stronger, smarter leadership in schools and communities. It is a partnership, I must say, in which I feel both personally and on behalf of the institute that I lead and the team that I lead, our very true sense of moral integrity and our sense of moral purpose. We feel that it is enhanced by this partnership rather than undermined. And for that I'm grateful. To this end, I acknowledge and I thank Professor Jeff Reardon, an educator and an academic who I've come to admire greatly. And I also acknowledge the exceptional team of people that you have around you, Jeff. Let me acknowledge my good friend and current Deputy Chancellor of the University of Canberra, Professor Tom Calma, and it's great to be in your company again. Much of what I have to say tonight is not particularly new. Whilst there may have been a change in government, I've found no reason to change what I say. I've not sought to reinvent myself or my message over the last few years, because all along I've been an advocate for an approach that has worked efficiently and effectively and has been replicated in many schools and communities throughout Australia. Of course, I'm referring here to the Stronger Smarter approach. Governments of all persuasions continue to deploy these sexy, if you like, big stick policies and processes that are proven to be exorbitantly expensive and dramatically inefficient. This is something made very clear in the non-fiction versions of the evaluation reports that have been developed. And in fact, it's even made clear in the fiction evaluation reports that are put out. Coupled with this, I should note that there's something strange about Australia, you know, who are sometimes, well, some sections of Australia who are quite content sometimes to see millions of dollars, of our dollars, of taxpayers' dollars, spent on such inefficient big stick approaches that dehumanise Aboriginal people, as well as low SES Australians. Some time ago in the media, I was asked how, as principal at Cherbourg School, I fixed attendance. Well, of course, I didn't fix it by myself. We did it as a team. And when I outlined some of the strategies that were about rewarding positive behaviour, like buying flowers as a reward for parents whose children had 100% attendance, like gift vouchers for children who had excellent attendance, gift vouchers from the local sports store, an approach that cost a few $100s here and there, yet saw attendance go from 62 to 94%. On hearing about such strategies, some people went crazy on talkback radio and online. The usual cry went up, why should they be rewarded for doing what is expected of everybody every day? It is a predictable response from what I might call unenlightened sections of our community that are either intent on despising Aboriginal people and other Australians in low SES communities. But what amazes me is that some quarters are either silent or cheering when millions of dollars are spent on salaries for bureaucrats to execute ineffective draconian big stick measures. It is a phenomenon that makes no sense to me. It seems that some of us are content when we see strategies that cost us millions and sink the boot into vulnerable people, and we don't really care if they work, while at the same time we express outrage at efforts that cost only hundreds of dollars here and there, and try to honour and embrace and nurture one's humanity and capacity. Of course, I'm not going to stand here and stereotype white Australians. One of my best friends is a white Australian. My sense, though, is that there are many Australians too who may not like such big stick approaches, yet feel a genuine sense of exasperation around these matters. Like somehow, this is not nice, but this is the only way to make a difference. And I'm reminded here of a passage in Martin Seligman's book called Learned Optimism, in which he referred to and described an experiment with two dogs performed some decades ago, not by Seligman, but it was an experiment that he was referring to. And today, the ethics of such an experiment would be questioned, but it's an experiment that offers some useful insights, I think. One dog in this experiment was contained in a box, and every time he put his head up, he received a mild and unpleasant shock. In another box, another dog, on putting his head up, would also receive a mild and unpleasant shock. But on some occasions, when that dog put his head up, he would receive a very pleasant reward. Now, the first dog developed a sense of learned despair, as Seligman referred to this. And as such, he simply kept his head down entirely. He saw no reason to put his head up at all, for fear of not achieving anything or attracting a kind of disincentive. The second, however, did not share such a sense of learned despair, and despite the mild and unpleasant shocks now and then, it continued to raise its head, anticipating a pleasant reward from time to time. And it occurs to me that as I reflect on the relationship between Aboriginal and white Australia, and the toxic historical cycles of neglect and intervention. This is somewhat like the sense of learned despair that has emerged in Aboriginal communities over the years. Watching politicians and bureaucrats come and go, promising great change, yet delivering more failure and entrenching a sense of despair. It is an analogy that is easy to grasp, I'm sure, and offers some insight into why some Aboriginal communities might seem so dysfunctional and so disengaged. But you know something? This same analogy can be used to illustrate that same sense of despair that may have become learned and entrenched within some of you as White Australia, as it might genuinely search for a way forward in Aboriginal policy reform. So I recognise that on the question of Aboriginal policy reform and a way forward here, whilst it's been complex, I recognise that White Australia's sense of despair might be just as entrenched as Aboriginal Australia's. Does that make sense? In recognition of this, I want to offer you this tonight. There is a different way that enables us to have a more honourable relationship between Aboriginal Australia and non-Aboriginal Australia. And I'm not asking you to take a leap of faith here. I'm asking us to invest some interest in what we have come to know about the pursuit of excellence with Aboriginal people, not the pursuit of mediocrity or the pursuit of the past. That said, let me just dwell momentarily on the past, specifically my time at Cherbourg School as principal, a place I do not consider entirely the place of the genesis of the Stronger, Smarter philosophy, but a place where the fruits of the Stronger, Smarter approach first blossomed or manifested. Okay, I'm going to need that. Anyway, check that out. It's not too bad. I won't read all of that. It is great yet humbling to be able to present such a story of change and a story of great teamwork, courage and triumph. Having had the privilege of leading in such a story, it is nice to know that it's a story that I don't have to chase people to make them listen. This is a story that makes itself known. A story that sits and commands that others listen. I have nothing to prove anymore. So I don't mind which way you or politicians go on this. Whether you embrace this message or not is up to you really. You make the choice. Whether you sit here as a politician, a bureaucrat, a corporate, an academic, or a community person with an interest in a way forward, it's up to you. Even the Prime Minister, wherever he is lately, has a choice about whether he is guided by people who read and write and theorise about what should be done, or whether he's guided by people who have actually done it. The Stronger, Smarter approach is articulated as follows. The Stronger, Smarter philosophy honours a positive sense of cultural identity, acknowledges and embraces positive community leadership, enabling innovative and dynamic approaches and processes that are anchored by high expectations relationships. High expectations relationships, we say, are those which honour the humanity of others and in so doing acknowledge one's strengths, capacity and human right to emancipatory opportunity. It's a philosophy built around the concept of high expectations for all people. The notion of high expectations is not new to educational literature. However, it builds upon these concepts and looks at depth in what it means for schools. This philosophy emphasises the need for high expectations for Aboriginal Australians, Torres Strait Islander Australians, and it works for all Australian students. Until Stronger, Smarter, this had not previously been done or talked about. In literature dialogues about Aboriginal education, it's fair to say that there was a tendency to try to explain why Aboriginal children could not contend with the demands of mainstream schooling. And in an effort to explicitly reject such a deficit dialogue, the philosophy incorporates both strong and smart. Much of the existing literature up until now has seen high expectations as meaning same or meaning mainstream. The stronger, smarter philosophy incorporates the notion of celebrating otherness, reclaiming a sense of otherness on our terms, and for us to determine what kind of other we want to be. And this is a strong and smart other that is way more sophisticated and positive in comparison to the other negative, stereotypical sense of identity held out by mainstream Australian societies historically. Philosophy emphasises not just believing in high expectations, but understanding what that actually means for teacher behaviour in the classroom and teacher relationships. And as we reflect on this, let me invite you to wonder about your own circumstance and what it actually means for you as a policy maker, as a program delivery person, or whatever role you might sit in. The approach and meta-strategies bring together theories from areas of leadership, cultural competence and teacher education in order to provide school leaders and community leaders with a comprehensive framework through which to consider their choice of teaching strategies and pedagogies. A teacher who gets the stronger, smarter approach will be influenced. Their decision-making will be influenced. A stronger, smarter kind of philosophical framework will enable the teacher to make the decision about tomorrow's learning experiences, and that will be the difference between whether they choose work that has intellectual rigour and intellectual integrity, or whether they choose to just push play on some DVD player in some remote Aboriginal community. In some practical sense, let me just drill down on some of these aspects and give you a feel for what this kind of nurturing this sense of identity looked like at Cherbourg School. And in order to do that, I want to just read some parts from this book about the very first school assembly that we had at Cherbourg School. If you could go on the next slide, that would be good. In fact, you can go on to the next one as well. I had arranged for an assembly of the whole school on the morning of my first day. The bell rang and the teachers gathered together their classes to meet me. Their excitement and curiosity seemed to match my nervousness and anxiety. I'm always fascinated at how so many kids can settle down and be quiet in anticipation of whatever words will be spoken to them at school assembly. At the moment of quiet, I raised my voice. "My name is Mr. Sarra," I explained. "You will refer to me as Mr. Sarra." I had to get this point across first, as teachers were letting themselves be referred to as Miss and whatever was their first name. It was not something I could live with in a school, as I harboured a belief and a sense of professional distance in a teacher-student relationship. To me, addressing teachers by their title was a marker of that. As well, if it didn't happen in a regular school, I didn't want it happening in this school. I wanted this school to be a regular school. "Good morning, everybody," I said, with my strong, brand new school principal voice. "Good morning, Mr. Sarra," they replied, with their voices tapering away, with what I guess was a sense of apprehension about getting my last name right. "Let's try that again. My name is Mr. Sarra. When I say good morning to you, I'm acknowledging you and being respectful. I want you to be the same with me. So when I say good morning, everybody, I want you to say good morning, Mr. Sarra," I explained with my voice tapering upwards for clarity. "Good morning, everybody," I hollered. "Good morning, Mr. Sarra," they replied, uniformly in a way that was much firmer and much more respectful. It may have been a bit pedantic, but I felt I just had to get some of these little things absolutely right from the outset. Once this was established, I wanted to get on to the main message. I took a deep breath and cast my eyes across a sea of curious black faces. "The most important thing that you will learn from me is that you can be Aboriginal and you can be successful. I want you to understand that I feel it is a great privilege to have this chance to work with you. I am here to work very hard, and I want you to work very hard with me. I will say this again. The most important thing that you will learn from me is that you can be Aboriginal and you can be successful. Just because we are blackfellas, that doesn't mean we have to be at the bottom. And so from the very first message at school, it went on, and so day to day we talked about what it meant to be strong and smart, and we refused absolutely to collude with the negative stereotype. The second key pillar, or meta strategy if you like, is about embracing positive community leadership that is beyond victim status. And this aspect of our philosophy is made complex by Aboriginal leadership that is intent on being the victim, and also Aboriginal leadership that is intent on engaging in mechanisms to boot the victim. Now, leading through victim status entails having to explain just how hopeless and hard up we are as a people, thus colluding with and conforming in some ways to the negative stereotype that is cast for us. And with this model of leadership, which has been effective in times, with this model of leadership, Aboriginal communities are likely to be seen as mere receivers of service rather than as creators of emancipatory processes. Under this type of leadership, government will do things to Aboriginal people, not with Aboriginal people, and very little will change. Being the victim type leadership is a form of low expectations collusion with a negative stereotypical view of being Aboriginal. Again, in other forums, I've lamented on the toxicity of that type of booting the victim type leadership, Aboriginal leadership. Put simply, this is a type of Aboriginal leadership that will avoid articulating the unpalatable messages that need to be heard and only tell their political and corporate masters what they want to hear. I've described this type of leadership as music to the ears of the political and corporate masters, and that which readily attracts attention, celebration, and generous reward, it's fair to say. The deepest problem here remains that such views proffered by this kind of booting the victim type leadership can validate and perpetuate the ignorance of political and corporate masters who have the power to make significant change. There becomes no need for such masters to have to truly engage with and understand the deep complexities of Aboriginal and Aboriginal people and Aboriginal communities. With a booting the victim type Aboriginal leader, who we can refer to as our friend, we can avoid the very tough and very complex challenges of getting into high expectations relationships with Aboriginal Australians. And again, let me just read an extract with you from this book to offer some insight into ways of embracing positive community leadership, even in places where it may not appear obvious. And I refer here to my very dear friend, Hooper Coleman, who like too many Aboriginal people, died long before he should have. I want to just, if you could just go on to the next page. This is my mate Hooper, who worked with me at Sherbrooke School. In the book I explained about when I met him, I was talking about working very late at Sherbrooke School into the night, up until 10, 11 o'clock at night when I first got there. That is until the kids were telling me all the ghost stories about the school. But on nights I'd work back late, and a few guys would stumble through. They'd been on the charge and they'd stumble through, and we'd have this conversation, and you'd have the same conversation over and over and over. But there was one guy who was different. One of those vagabond friends was Hooper Coleman. He was such a rogue with the blackest skin wrapped around a stocky yet reasonably muscular body. Every scar on his face and body had its own story about fights he had gotten into, police he had run from in his younger days, but most were about some lady he had loved and forsaken. He had a lot of scars. Hooper would sometimes stumble in telling me that he'd been drinking metho, and it would be clear from the smell he was talking straight with me. He never bothered me in the same way that others did, though, because I was often so intrigued by the things he would tell me about. He grew up on the Cherbourg mission and hated it so much that he ran away when he was 14 to live on the streets in Brisbane. He also talked about knocking around with guys like Lionel Fogarty, a notable activist and poet from Cherbourg, and Dennis Walker, also an activist and the son of famous poet, author and activist Ujuru Ngunnawal, also known as Kath Walker. I was fascinated by Hooper's stories. He told me about all the rallies and protest marches in Brisbane when Joh Bjelke-Petersen was still the Premier. Now this is Hooper speaking. All these big noting leaders would come around and pick up us drones at Musgrave Park and fill us full of grog. We'd love it because it was a free charge. And they'd take us to the rallies and put us right up the front, while they stayed back because the cops would get to us first and flog the hell out of us. But it was okay because we didn't feel anything and we had to make a stand. To many, Hooper might have seemed like just some old drunk, but he was offering me an amazing insight into the challenges of Aboriginal people in the 1960s and 70s. This was different from what I'd learned or experienced myself. This was the story of people from the mission. Through Hooper's rich stories and the stories of others, I realised the challenges faced by Aboriginal people who've grown up on missions were quite different from those who hadn't. I go on to explain various things, but let me come back to Hooper. Hooper was obviously intelligent and well-read, yet it seemed in a conventional context he had little to show for it. In part, I guess it might have been because he didn't step up in the right places at the right times. Conversely, I'm also certain it was partly because the people he encountered simply didn't have the capacity to embrace the leadership skills he had to offer. Maybe this was because he didn't come in the conventional leadership package. Maybe it was because it was easier to oppress and contain him rather than engage him in some type of authentic dialogue in which all would be challenged and as a result be better. Whatever it was, I was not going to make the same mistake of missing out on what he had to offer. Hey brother, you ever thought about coming to work here at the school with me? I got nearly all females on staff and I need some strong males in the place. What? You looking for a new groundsman or something? No, I need you in the classroom. These kids have got to see you in action and they need to hear the things that you've got to say. Oh yeah, I reckon I could give that a crack, he replied, as I edged closer to cutting a deal with him. As he thought about it, he became even more animated. You know, these kids are really smart, but they've just got to be given a chance. They got hard lives, some of them, but they just need someone to kick them along and keep telling them they can do it. It was bad enough all the shit I had to go through when I was a kid, and I don't want to see them end up like me. They got a lot of opportunities now, and if they can just step up and get that little bit of a kick along, they can really go places. Not like me. That's what I want them to be. It was an awesome soliloquy. I watched on in silence, mesmerised. A flicker of light was emerging from the darkness of his life. In this one conversation, Hooper had shifted from being just some old drunk whom most people didn't take too seriously to a man committed to changing the lives of the children of Cherbourg and ensuring that they were projected into a future that was better than his past. I've always been amazed at the leadership when you give it a place to be. And I think, as long as I have memories of my good mate Hooper, I will always reject any notion that Aboriginal people lack capacity and lack humanity because of what they might appear or what they might look like in communities. The other key pillar or meta strategy of the Stronger, Smarter approach is about high expectations relationships. A high expectations relationship is one in which we have the courage to be firm and the compassion to be fair. A relationship that lacks compassion to be supportive in which we only know about big stick approaches with so-called courage is one that signals low expectations and collusion with a negative stereotype. A relationship that lacks courage, the courage to challenge, in which we only know how to be compassionate, is one that signals low expectations and collusion with a negative stereotype. This is the kind of relationship in which I describe people who are so open-minded that their brains fall out. A relationship in which we have both the compassion to be supportive and the courage to challenge and bring out the big stick if required is one that signals high expectations and collusion with Stronger Smarter. From here, let me just let you reflect on the Stronger Smarter approach in other places. I talked about it in Cherbourg, and I'm going to just run through some slides and just let you see the Stronger Smarter effect in other schools. I'm going to let you just read those for yourself. You can decide when you, yeah. I don't really want to, you can have a look at that. This is Glenroi. It's a school in New South Wales, Orange. Described as one of the toughest schools on the wrong side of the railway track. Yet evidence suggests that we can make a difference in such places. West Arnhem, a very remote college in the Northern Territory. Have a look at that Year 12 retention, 22% to 100%. And there'll be no talk about cutting people's welfare payments in those places. I should say, as you reflect upon this kind of data, that I stand very confidently and present you with the Cherbourg data, knowing that I was there and I was leading a team that delivered that. And I'm not standing here pretending for a moment that just because of the Stronger Smarter approach and work that we've done with these principals and community leaders and teachers, that we've executed the delivery of that data. Because I know how hard it is, and I know that one has to sweat blood to deliver such change. The best I can do is say that we are delighted to be in a relationship with such people and have been able to influence such change. In the Kimberley region, we've worked across the whole region, and this will give you an insight into some of the outcomes in those sorts of schools. Coming to New South Wales and ACT district soon in places that we haven't touched already. Daywall is a little school in the middle of nowhere, possibly one of the most remotest schools in Australia, and very good attendance. Literacy and numeracy had been surging. It's a place I'd visited myself, and the intellectual quality of those classrooms are such that they would match any kind of school on the edge of the CBD in Sydney or Brisbane or Melbourne. And let's keep rolling. Can I just explain the intention of the Stronger Smarter Institute? Beyond the partnership that we have with University of Canberra, our intention is to go from just one school, and it's great to know that we've worked with more than 350 schools across Australia. And over the next couple of years, in fact, we're contemplating a partnership with Reconciliation Australia also, to get all Australian schools beyond a stronger, smarter tipping point. Let me round some things up here and just reflect on this whole notion of high expectations relationships. And from my perspective, it's about getting the compass right from the very beginning. A relationship in which we purge the toxicity of low expectations and stifled perceptions of each other, and one in which we let our hearts beat more closely together. Let me explain this a little more. When I talk about getting the compass right, you might be well-intentioned, but if you come to the relationship with me and you come to feel sorry for me, that's going to make our hearts less proximal. And the journey can start some degrees out. So your compass might be that way, and mine is 1 or 2 degrees off. And in the long run, it's going to see us take off and be a long way apart. This does create quite a distance in the long run. You might come to me determined, or you might come to us as Aboriginal people determined that we must change and become like you in every way, emulating your way of existing, assimilated if you like. And if you come to the relationship with this intention, then it is natural for us to assume that you come with a sense that you are superior to us and that we are inferior to you. With this as our starting point, it is natural to assume that it is impossible for our hearts to beat closely together. And further, the calibrations for the journey that we must pursue are deeply problematic. And so you're going to end up in that direction, and I'm going to end up in that direction. And if you reflect on the relationships that have existed so far, knowing that the compass has probably not been right from where we have started, and we've ended up in very different places, you can start to understand why we've spent billions of dollars on Aboriginal affairs and achieved nothing seriously appreciable. Not entirely, but we have spent billions with futility. Let me indulge here just for a moment, if you will, on offering what I think is the best analogy for our relationship here. And I do this with explicit kind of mindfulness of your sponsorship arrangements, because I'm referring here to the Rugby League All-Stars match. And that's the real football, Jeff, I'm referring to, not some other version. The playing field is level. And go the Raiders, by the way. And the Brumbies too. The playing field is level. Think of the All-Stars match that lots of us delighted in. We each bring our own excellence to the field. Aboriginal excellence, Torres Strait Islander excellence, and the rest of Australia's excellence. We're inspired to give our best and to be our best. And at the end of the day, we shake hands. And it doesn't matter what the scoreboard says. Well, not really anyway. Because everyone in this circumstance is victorious. And the relationship, everyone is victorious when the agenda and the relationship is about high expectations and the pursuit of excellence. With this approach, we don't spend millions and billions with futility. We can actually make millions together with integrity. Now, this might sound exotic, when I talk about this stronger, smarter, our hearts beating together, getting the compass right. I know that it might sound exotic, but this is the very approach that enabled me to work with a team of exceptional people at Cherbourg to overcome the challenges in front of us at Cherbourg, as elders, as teachers, with the council, with the parents and the children. This is the very approach that enabled me to work with an exceptional team of people and some exceptional education leaders and community leaders right across Australia to change the tide of low expectations of Indigenous children right across Australia. It might sound exotic, but applied this is the approach that enabled us to do such things, to change expectations in one school and to change expectations across Australia. Let's let our hearts beat close together by making our work personal. And again, if I reflect on my time at Cherbourg, I remember very well, and I invite you to think about how this might apply to you. When I would go out of my office to meet with parents who were grumpy with me, I would sometimes literally stare at my own face in the mirror before I'd go to this meeting with the parents. And I would look at myself and I would say to myself, what if this was my own big sister I was going to talk to about her children, my nephews and nieces? How would I want her spoken to? What if it was my child? What if this was my own mum, my own family? And how would I want them dealt with? What sorts of outcomes would I like? And when it came to teachers in our school, I would ask myself this question: would I consider this teacher good enough to teach my child? And if the answer is no, then why the hell would I let anybody else be subjected to such incompetence? When we make our work personal, the question shifts from what do we do with this child, or what do we do with these people, to what would I want done if this was my child? Or what would I want done if these were my people? And we are all your people. Again, it might sound exotic, but when it is the starting point, it will manifest itself in the way that we engage people and we conduct our business more effectively and efficiently, with our moral and aspirational compass calibrated with respect and dignity. Having said what the stronger, smarter approach is, I feel slightly compelled to say what it is not. It is not cherry-picking kids for scholarships in elite schools. This is not high expectations. This offers the veneer of high expectations for the cherry-picked few, less than 10% of children, of Aboriginal children. But it is an approach that is prepared to write off the other 90% of Aboriginal children. And I'm not prepared to do that. And I would never call this a high expectations approach for all children, because I'm interested in the 100% of Indigenous children across Australia. Direct instruction is not high expectations, not for children and not for the teaching profession. It is a costly remedial program that would never be used in a high SES school, because they would be empowered enough to tell the sellers of this product to get lost. But somehow it is one that is considered acceptable for Indigenous and low SES communities. This is not a high expectations approach. With high expectations, with our hearts beating more closely together and the relationships calibrated correctly from the start, we can continue on the journey to transformation. With a stronger, smarter approach, we've worked with more than 350 schools across Australia. And in those schools and communities, we've stopped hoping for a brighter future for Aboriginal children and low SES children. We've stopped hoping for a brighter future for them because we expect it. And we will do whatever it takes to deliver on this stronger, smarter promise. I know this because I've seen it. I've seen classrooms in some of the most remote schools in Australia with intellectual integrity to match that of any school in provincial or metropolitan centres. I've seen high schools, some with reputations for being the toughest in the country, go from having 0% in some schools of retention of Aboriginal students to year 12 to 100% retention of Aboriginal students. And so in the same way that I say to young Aboriginal children that it is okay to believe in being strong and smart, I say to you, it is okay to believe that you truly can have an honourable, high expectations relationship between Aboriginal Australia and non-Aboriginal Australia. Together, let's subscribe to notions of optimism rather than notions of despair. With hearts beating close together, the relationship calibrated right from the very start, and for the pursuit of excellence. When we let our hearts beat closer together, it is then, and only then, that we all become more in tune with the rhythm of this great land that we share. And in a respectful relationship, in a respectful high expectations relationship that is in tune with the rhythm of this land that we share, we truly can transcend all of the challenges we face together as a people. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have some time for some questions or comments, and so can I invite you to begin? Who would like to start?
Hi, I'm Joan Corbett and I'm in the public health discipline here at the University of Canberra, and I'm very inspired by what you say, and I am really thinking through what it means in the way I do what I'm doing. But I wanted to ask you particularly about the health outcomes that are also related to the stronger, smarter approach. And I'm sure there are many from this experience. The educational data is fabulous, but I'm interested in what you can say about the health data.
Thanks very much, Joan. Let me explain to you that I will, in our efforts to kind of offer the stronger, smarter sort of philosophical approach, there are some things that that we're quite deliberate about, and that is keeping it at a philosophical kind of framework. Because having been in a school and knowing how hard it is to work in a community, in a school, in any place, and knowing how complex such environments are and can be, I'm never one to reach in beyond their expertise and tell a teacher what they should be saying, for instance, or tell a principal what kind of literacy or numeracy program she or he should be running, or whatever. So we stick to this kind of the kind of 5 pillars, if you like, or meta strategies as we call them, around the stronger, smarter approach, and that is nurturing a positive sense of identity as opposed to collusion with a negative stereotype, embracing positive community leadership as opposed to embracing that which is about nurturing victim status or booting the victim type leadership, and it's about high expectations relationships which are firm and fair. And similarly, I would keep it deliberately philosophical. Having watched others reach into professions that they know nothing about, I wouldn't act in such an offensive way. But I would offer to you the kind of philosophical overarching framework. And let me just start at that point and then descend down, shall we? So if I'm a health worker in a remote community and I'm applying a stronger, smarter approach, what it would mean is, let's stick with the health worker in communities. If I'm designing or delivering a program, I would have to ask myself, is the program nurturing kind of victim status, or is it designed to feel sorry for people, or is it designed to challenge them to lift? Do you know what I'm saying? If I'm a policymaker sitting in Canberra, when I'm kind of devising or wondering about which policy levers to pull, I would have to reflect on those overarching kind of philosophical themes and say, does this policy approach, does it signal a belief in the capacity of Aboriginal people, or does it signal disbelief? Do you know what I mean? And if it signals disbelief, it's probably a big stick approach that's colluding with low expectations. But it may be the case that it's signalling belief and advocates a kind of big stick approach, but only after we've given an opportunity for those individuals to lift and develop their own health. Let me give you an example. If for instance, a healthy fetus is the issue. A stronger, smarter approach would look to the approaches in, say, Mexico. I forget the exact name, but if it was the behaviour that was ideal was going for regular checkups to your obstetrician or to the community nurse or whatever, rather than bring a big stick and smash people around the head to make them go to that health worker, we might consider rewarding that kind of behaviour in not a big, grandiose kind of way. And again, I retrieve my kind of reservations about aspects of society that would jump and kick and scream. But engage in a way that rewards that sort of behaviours, accepting that, you know, it's not ideal, but it might influence a generation of new babies that are coming through. And it would stimulate, because young mums who might be drinking in communities would be watching others rewarded for that behaviour. And you would hope that that would influence their behaviour in that kind of positive, towards that positive sort of way of behaving. And that said, I'm you know, for the people who like the big stick approach, I'm not saying we don't have I am saying we don't have the big stick approach, but I'm saying that we do have to be firm in relationships, but only after we've given the opportunity to people to lift themselves. And so we would come to the relationship, whether we work in education or in health, we would come to the relationship with a belief in the humanity of people, and we would acknowledge that, and in so acknowledging that, we would signal a belief in your capacity to lift yourself given the right opportunities around you. Does that make sense?
Hello, Chris. Paul Collis, my name.
Paul.
I'm a professional student. Going nowhere fast. I'm interested in the stuff around disadvantage, what that might mean to you, what it looks like from an Aboriginal perspective, and could the stronger, smarter approach work with Indigenous prisoners or with policy around jails?
With what?
Indigenous prisoners.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it could. And again, I would not venture into that area and say these are the programs, run those in prisons. I wouldn't behave in that kind of offensive way. But I would offer a philosophical kind of framework with which to think about how people who are experts in that area would design their programs. And it's similar to what I talked about before. You know, that is it an approach that's designed to sink the boot into individuals and undermine the humanity of those people, even if they are in prison? Or is it a policy approach or a programs approach that says, hey, I believe in you, and I believe you can lift if we put the right mechanisms and environments and processes around you. But also, do you know what, if we give you opportunities to lift and you don't take them, there might be consequences for that. And we'll have the courage to execute those consequences. Does that make sense?
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to I'm going to draw the formal parts of the proceedings to a close, but I'll invite you in a moment to join us for refreshments outside. I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Tom Calmer for his comments. When I know I'm going to give the vote of thanks, I usually write just a list of key words and then I ad-lib some prose around it. But actually I think all I need to do is read out the list. And I don't know if it's similar to your list, but I found your lecture thoughtful, profound, provocative, important, ethical, assertive, human, witty, bold, controversial, and not just about rugby league, positive and optimistic. And to evoke such responses on a topic so important that Australians' conscience can never be clear until we can move forward ethically together. To evoke such responses, I think, is the sign of a great Ngunnawal lecture. So, Chris, I'm proud that we're associated with you, and thank you very much for giving the 2013 Ngunnawal Lecture. Now, we have a gift for you. So, we have a gift for you, and it's not a bottle, and it's not a CD. Well, it's something connected with a running dispute that you have with our Dean, Professor Jeff Reardon. So, do you want to... So it is a Brumby's hard hat.
Excellent. I'll put it on.